I want to start off that this isn't going to be a proper like D&D stories I've had done before, where I share adventures or things that happen with tabletop games, so much as my feelings of the two systems that you see in the title. I'll try to explain my feelings on them and why I feel certain ways about certain things, but just know I'm not very articulate or very good at finding the words for how I feel about certain things beyond I don't like this or I do like this thing. That said, on with this video. I believe I've stated several times in the past that whilst I love to play in the Pathfinder rule set, that doesn't mean I don't have problems with it, especially when it comes to comparing it to Dungeons & Dragons 3.5. I know that the systems are pretty interchangeable, as again, when it first came out, Pathfinder was referred to as 3.75 by not only my friends, but also a majority of the people on the internet as well. But there's a different feel to Pathfinder over Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, which I'm going to simply refer to 3.5 from here on, which makes the two games separate from what they intended. First off though, there's a lot of changes to the rules that make things simpler, or just make more sense when you read them and compare them to the 3.5 variations. Grappling, or really any combat maneuver, is simplified to a couple of rolls and some penalties and bonuses based on success and failure. Classes feel more independent from one another from the get-go, not even including the archetypes you can use for the classes, effectively changing how a certain class can further be played based on what you pick. Maybe you want to play a pickpocket rogue over a trap-finding rogue. There's an archetype for that. Perhaps you want your barbarian rage to shapeshift you into an animal? There's an archetype for that too. Maybe you want to take your fighter to the next level of weapon specialization and gain abilities based solely on your equipment. Well, what do you know, there's an archetype for damn near every kind of fighter play style. On top of that, they even released a book that's not unlike 3.5's Unearthed Arcana, where there are new optional rules you can swap the old ones out for, as well as different other features of races and classes. Except the Pathfinder Unchained book has newer versions of some of the classes that, again, changes how they're played. It's to the point where players are usually fully fleshed out by the time they're level 5, and some sort of ridiculously powerful by 8th. It's a really solid system that improves a lot on what we've already been given in 3.5. Hells, even psionics is covered better by Dreamscarred Press's Psionics Unleashed in Pathfinder than the Psionics Expanded Handbook. And options are pretty much the name of the game with Pathfinder. There is a huge number of them now, and there are new options every week and month, with new little books with 30 pages of them, from class archetypes and feats to class and magic options, to huge colossal ultimate books that make it so as you can change the way you play entirely with different classes. There's a lot to take in now when you're first starting into Pathfinder, and that's all the optional stuff without even thinking about the core classes. The core classes of Bard, Barbarian, Cleric, Druid, Fighter, Monk, Paladin, Rogue, Ranger, Wizard, Sorcerer are all given massive amounts of flexibility which differ per class. Barbarians now have rage powers, which give them different abilities when they rage. Sorcerers now have bloodlines, which give them other separate abilities, like calling down hellfire or transmuting one of their body parts into like a massive claw. Rangers get to choose either animal companions or granting bonuses to allies against their favored enemies. Point is, even without other books beyond the core books, there is a ton of options on how to play your character, especially since compared to 3.5 you get more feats as well. So now that I've gone on several paragraphs worth of praise on how the system has changed for the better, what's my problem with it? Well, this is personal preference almost entirely, which makes pretty much anything I say moot because, opinions on the internet. But the biggest distinction between the two systems isn't so much the systems themselves, but the feel of the campaigns, the flavor of the campaigns. Not only has it become easier to run games, I'd argue that the system's changes makes it harder for a dungeon master to properly challenge a group of players without outright killing them. I'll try to explain with the best of my abilities. One of the things that Pathfinder does is increase the hit die for all of the less than full base attack classes. That is, your fighters and barbarians get 1 base attack bonus per class level, rogues and clerics get 3/4 their level in base attack, so on and so forth. So now rogues and other classes with 3/4 base attack get D8s instead of D6s. Full-on casters like wizards and sorcerers are now D6s instead of D4s. Okay, this makes sense, especially with lower levels. No longer is a level 1 sorcerer at threat of dying to a kobold with a freaking spear. But over the course of leveling up, that's quite a lot more hit points for the entire group as well. And sometimes there's little difference in an unlucky fighter's hit points compared to a really lucky wizard's hit points. This can and has turned many a wizard and sorcerer really reckless in my campaigns. Which, they shouldn't, because they are to fighters as glass is to stone. While HP is a thing to worry about, it's the least of the worries I've felt about Pathfinder. I know that I spent a small amount of time praising the archetypes and how they add more options, but they also remove the point of one of my favorite things from 3.5, prestige classes. I like having a character that starts at 1 and being a somewhat clean slate, knowing that there's room for change, to grow into something. Prestige classes were that way of showing that growth, while still knowing that there are other options and other things that you can do. Like the first 5 to 8, sometimes 10 levels were an initiation into that prestige class. And once you have that prestige class, you only become stronger, gaining more abilities that are focused on the one thing you want to do. It's growth through game mechanics that I appreciate, and it adds a touch more flavor to a character that I dig as both a player and as a dungeon master. While Pathfinder does have prestige classes, they're actually pretty unnecessary, as if you can pick the right archetypes, you can just go down the list and gain it and you're done. I know this is kind of a blah thing to gripe about in Pathfinder, as it's about a preference of how to make your character. You can still prestige in Pathfinder, but for the most part, while it adds flavor to your character most of the time, the resulting character usually isn't as strong as someone who flat out leveled in a single archetyped class, especially with the core and base classes having 20th level capstone abilities they all gain. But yeah, it's mostly a flavor thing. I won't knock the more feats though. If there is one thing I do like, it's that you get a feat every other level instead of every 3 levels. This can give a lot more options to your characters and would probably happily just take that aspect from Pathfinder and apply it to future 3.5 games. Speaking of that word, flavor, I've been using that word a lot and I feel like I need to explain myself a touch. See, 3.5, to me, gives off that feel of a classic 80s fantasy movie. Like Conan the Barbarian, Hawk the Slayer, Kroll, those kinds of movies. While I do get some vibes of your Harry Potters and whatnot, I've not watched all the movies and read all the books, mind you, most of 3.5 evokes those old movies. Pathfinder's flavor is... I'm not quite sure. See, most of the stuff created by Paizo centers around their campaign setting, Galarian. It's like this massive hodgepodge continent with basically every kind of fantasy you want in it, all within thousands of miles of one another. Gothic setting, Egyptian setting, fantasy meets sci-fi settings, African safari setting, just everything is in there. Don't get me wrong, they got those things going on too in 3.5, but the lands always felt more far apart, like a certain realm has a theme and sticks to it. Because let's face it, a setting like Ravenloft would feel completely different if you realized that 100 miles in the other direction, a spacecraft from Mars crashed down. And yes, Earth is canon to the Galarian world. I mean, this is all just personal preference and game styles, and to be fair, it is just me. Most of the tabletop games I play in, I end up being the dungeon master anyways, so as a DM, I find it way harder to make a half-decent challenge in any sort of situation for a group of players without making no-win situations in Pathfinder. On the other hand, magic is a big thing in both of the games, and I have a high preference of combat with weapons and spells. You could probably tell that if you see any of my dungeons or traps I decide to write up. Very little of it is straight up magic, and is usually some sort of supernatural happening. Again, this is more based on my preferred playstyle, and most of my favorite spell-based classes in both systems aren't technically spellcasters, and they're more shoot energy at the range caster, like a warlock from 3.5, or kineticist from the Pathfinder books, or a martial spellcaster mix, like the classes presented from the Tome of Battle, Book of the Nine Swords, again 3.5, an excellent book that I really wish I had gotten to use more, and the Pathfinder's Magus, which I actually haven't used at all. I just kind of like the premise of it. Even then though, I prefer the martial aspect of those classes. Hells, if I could get a group together that would do a low to no magic campaign, that'd be pretty great for me. Well, after doing the equivalent of putting both systems on a scale and judging them by the most minute of measurements, Pathfinder is still a great system and an awesome successor to D&D 3.5. Way better than 4th edition. Hell, you can put 3.5 in Pathfinder with little to no issues, save for sometimes having a little power hit here and there. If my group prefers to play Pathfinder over 3.5, I'll do so because it's still fun. Just fun in a different way. To pretty much sum it up, I could put it in a pseudo sort of anime analogy, which I'm not sure is 100% accurate, as I haven't seen one of these animes, but I've seen a little bit. D&D 3.5 is like Record of Lodoss War, where everything is a rough situation, no fight is completely a guaranteed win, and someone is likely to find some sort of development in the fights to come. Pathfinder, I find, feels more or less like Sword Art Online. Game's plot feels a lot like it's always an item on the back burner, whilst the meta of the game is what's front and center. Harsh comparison, I know. But I think I'm done with that. Both are solid. I just would like to play more 3.5. Thank you everyone for listening to me ramble about my feelings on the matter. Tell me what you guys think about going from 3.5 to Pathfinder, or even what you think Paizo has done with the system in the comments below. Would like to hear what other people think on it. Or maybe you just want to tell me that my feelings on the whole thing are stupid, so I don't know. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Take care. Cheers.